of a catch-all area. It was called experimental psychology. It consisted, the active members, there were 2 animal researchers, 2 educational psychologists, 1 neuroscientist, and 1 perception person. All right, and so we were given the opportunity to hire someone. There were 2 strong candidates that year. It's 1994, so we didn't hire for a long time. But in 1994, we interviewed Eric, and there was another person who was also very good, but he did research with rats. And the department was kind of wrestling with the expense of maintaining a pigeon colony and a rat colony. We had lots of undergraduates who were available for research. And so we kind of decided, did we want to put money into hiring this other person and keeping a rat colony, or did we want to hire this new guy and use human subjects, so undergraduate subjects? And so we went with Eric. After Eric came, one of the animal people decided he wasn't going to do research anymore. The 2 educational psychologists went to the new college of education. The perception person retired, and that left Eric and the neuroscientist and me. And we were given an opportunity by the department to make another hire. And so we had to make the final decision then. Do we go with an animal person, because now we had lost an animal researcher, or do we change from experimental psychology to cognitive psychology? And we made the right decision, and we decided to go with the cognitive area. Now there were 3 areas in the department then. There was a strong counseling psychology, strong social psychology, and an area that was called psychometrics and individual differences. The department decided, especially some of the social psychologists wanted some more cognitive psychologists. The department decided that's the way we're going to go. So Eric and I and Gary Wells, who isn't here, who's a social psychologist, but really he's a closet cognitive psychologist. We were given the task of some hires, hiring some faculty. I thought about it last night, but I didn't have the time to go through all of the different search committees that the 3 of us were on. It took years. Now we were kind of in a catch-22. We wanted good, strong cognitive people, and they looked at us and they said, ooh, this is a weak little cognitive area, and so we don't want to come. Until 2001, so it was years that we were trying to hire. We made offers, people wouldn't come. We hired Ann Cleary, who has since left. We hired Allison Morris, who unfortunately passed away. And then we got some other researchers. We got Rob West, who has moved on, but Jason and Shanna and John Kelly. And so we were able to come up with a nice, strong cognitive area. I think we did a pretty good job, but Eric was the first cognitive psychologist that we hired. Okay, enough of my droning on. I've got a few comments from some students, because we're going to listen to some students in just a minute. Students know all about faculty. I've got some comments from 3 students who were not able to come today. Jeremiah Still, who got his PhD in 2009. Eric was on his master's committee. Jeremiah's now at Old Dominion. He said, I mainly knew him as a passionate instructor that all students spoke highly of. I always enjoyed hearing his research talks, like this other talk, that were exceptionally well-structured and bursting with enthusiasm. ISU psychology undergraduate majors and anyone attending the weekly cognitive seminars is going to miss Dr. Cooper's wit and humor. Chris Mashaki, look at his PhD in 2010. He's now a faculty member at Frostburg. Auditing his evolutionary psychology course was one of the most enjoyable educational experiences I've ever had. And it became one of my favorite courses to teach. I never would have thought to teach it if it hadn't been for Dr. Cooper's course. I still use at least half of the notes from his course and teaching my own course. And Chris says, I also have fond memories of cleaning his overhead projector transparencies. Now, your undergraduates may not realize at one time, transparencies, writing with an overhead, that was the technology that we used. And graduate students had the job of cleaning them off to use again because they ran about 50 cents a piece. And we just didn't want to use them one time. He also says, Chris also says, I also remember his practicing for his 2-minute introductory speech in your office for the time he ran for governor, as well as for several debates in Ames. Now, if you've been looking at any of these slides, you may have noticed that several of the pictures, like this one, Eric has been a very active member of the Libertarian Party. He's ran for various offices at the county and the state level, including for governor. The year he ran for governor, he even arranged his teaching schedule in the fall so that he had plenty of time to travel. During that year, he had every county in the state doing personal campaigning. And when Chris mentions Eric's practicing for the debate in Ames, I always felt sorry for anybody who followed Dr. Cooper, I should say, not Eric, who followed Dr. Cooper in any kind of debate or engaged with him one-on-one. He's darn smart. He does his research, and you've heard how he speaks. He's got this very authoritative way of speaking. When he was campaigning, he used me as his foil. We met for lunch every week, and he would ask me, okay, what do you think of this topic? He told me I was the most liberal person he knew. He wanted to understand how liberals really thought so that he could rebut the position if it was rebuttable. He wanted the debates to be what he called intellectually honest. I always felt like I let the liberals down. Because it was the libertarian position that usually came across as being the better position. I learned a lot about intellectual honesty. Eric is the epitome of intellectually honest. All right, I've got one more, I'll stop talking again. I've got one more student. This is Larissa Arnold. She got her PhD in 2018. She's now at Clark University in Dubuque. And she sent me this story last night. The story I always think of when I remember Dr. Cooper is when we went to visit the Great Ape Trust in Des Moines. When we arrived, Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, she's a well-known researcher with great apes, was walking around the facility with a diapered baby chimp on her hip like it was her own baby. We walked over to an enclosure that was housing some bonobos. They were massive and intimidating, and one of them was pushing around this gigantic barrel that must have weighed hundreds of pounds. He was clearly trying to show off his strength to all of the observers. The enclosure was surrounded by a fence that went all the way to the ceiling, and there were chairs up in front of the cage. Dr. Cooper and I chose a spot in the front row. Shortly after we sat down, the bonobo climbed up the fence, took a giant mouthful of water, and spit it all over us and the rest of the crowd. So we moved to another enclosure where Kanzi was kept. Now, Kanzi is a well-known, so undergraduates, who's Kanzi?
Kanzi is the chimpanzee that lives in Des Moines that's like really famous for using Alexa grids.
Okay, so they went to an enclosure where Kanzi was kept. Let's see. This one had a large glass window, and again, we took a seat to watch what Kanzi would do, hoping that we'd get to see him use his Lexgram board. The bottom of the window was a few feet off the ground, so we could only see the upper half of Kanzi's body. At some point, he started pointing at a woman in the audience with one hand, while his other hand was making a strange motion. Eventually, we all realized with horror that Kanzi was, how shall I put this, pleasuring himself. He was quite pleased with the woman he was pointing out. On the way back to campus, Dr. Cooper and I were so caught up in a conversation about the experience that I ended up missing every exit back into Ames. It was probably my most memorable experience in graduate school. Okay, that's it for me. I've got some of his students who'd like to say, ex-students, who'd like to say a few words. So you guys determine how you're going to do it.
You go in chronological order?
Yeah.
Sure. It needs you, Dr. Brooks.
Oh, no. All right. Well, these guys are going to roast the crap out of him, so I'm going to be a little sentimental, which is the opposite of me at my core, to be honest. So first of all, I do want everybody to know that Dr. Cooper announced on public television in front of everybody that if there was ever any chance he was actually going to win any of the positions that he was going for, he would be out campaigning against himself. Just to be clear. So he was not actually trying to win. So anyway, but I thought that was funny. But I just want to say two fundamental things. One is, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Cooper. I am, frankly, wildly more successful in all those things that will never make me happy than I ever would have been if it wasn't for Dr. Cooper. Dr. Cooper is undisputably one of the smartest people on the planet. I guarantee it. You look at his GRE scores, you look at his IQ, and I learned more from him in my time here than I've ever learned from density of learning in my entire life. He taught me how to be a scientist. He taught me how to fundamentally think about the world. He taught me massive amounts about cognitive neuroscience, research methods, statistics, logic. I now work at 3M, and because of what he taught me, these two people have jobs, to be honest. And I'm now a senior scientist at 3M, and I've gotten a wonderful family, and I don't know if most of this would have happened if it wasn't for Dr. Cooper. So I just want to say thank you for having, I don't know of anybody who's had a larger impact on my intellectual life and frankly the trajectory of my life. Now my wife's sitting here, so I had to say it like Socrates.
And she's recording it.
So then the last thing I'll state is we were just what Veronica said about intellectual honesty. I think, and I do have the liberal gene, so Cooper and I disagree on almost everything politically. Well, not really, to be honest. But I want to say that the world needs a lot more Dr. Cooper's profoundly. We're living in an age where it really is hard to find truth. And we're living in an age where the my side bias is the most fundamental problem. So hopefully most of you know about the my side bias. And it's that everybody is really freaking good at seeing the world the way they want to see it, that they benefit from and what they come from their own background. Here's one of the moments that is the most striking examples of Dr. Cooper's intellectual honesty. We were sitting at the Okoboji Grill, maybe had a few beers, maybe even more than a few, and Dr. Cooper actually opened up to me about something. He said, you know, one of my greatest fears is that it's so hard to know whether your beliefs are your beliefs because they benefit you and they benefit the status that it gives on you versus that the world is really like you believe it. And that's what he talked about as a fundamental concern. We need a crap ton of more people that have that concern versus the concern of how they look, how they earn, and how they exist. Because I think that the right, that I agree with Dr. Cooper on everything except the unit of happiness, which is I think that the amount of happiness matters, not just the individual. So I just want to say that for all you professors that are out there, be more like Dr. Cooper. Try to see the world fundamentally the way it is. And we will have progress analogous to Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now book. Because if you think of the quintessential person, I know no one more. Enlightenment Now, quintessential what Steven Pinker's talking about with Dr. Eric Cooper. So thank you, Dr. Cooper.